Welcome back to another episode of the Game Engine series. Input systems. That's what we're doing today. Last time we built our event system, and now we need a way to start consuming these events. That's where input comes in. We're gonna really just handle all the different kinds of input related events like keyboard and mouse. Those are the two big ones. And then just create basically an easy interface for anyone developing a game to use. So there's gonna be kind of two parts to this episode. First, we're going to create the input manager, and then I'm going to just write a little bit of code. We'll go into some stuff we'll get a lot more into in the future, but I'll just write a little bit of code to show how we can use this to just move our quad around the screen. And that'll be the episode. Pretty soon we'll also do delta time, which kind of goes hand in hand with input. We'll get there once I show you how to move the quad, but that'll be probably a short episode in itself. We're not getting into that today. Yeah, we built our event system already, so now let's leverage it. Let's start using it. Great, so now we're back in the code. So as always, let's run, see what we have last time, and we have our input. As we can see, we have our keys, mouse movement, and by the end of this episode, we are going to be able to move this quad around with WASD. So that's the goal. We're going to get into something that we're just going to kind of code for now, which are uniforms. Definitely an important thing. We will get into them more as we show shaders more, but it's just a sneak peek that we'll have this episode. Let's clear that and get into the code. So the first thing we'll want to do is create our input. Okay, and we'll start with our imports. So std, and then we'll also want our event from last time. Event.zig. Nice. So one kind of helper we'll have is position, just help reduce the amount of code we write later. And that'll just be X and Y. And again, this code. So when I say input, we're writing our input manager. And what this will do is basically just take the current event and store its relevant information. And we're going to use a cool built-in thing called std once, which I'll show pretty soon. Nice. So we'll start writing, as I said, so mouse position, mouse delta, which this will be the change in position, mouse scroll, which again, all these are positions. So then we'll look at all our keys and we'll just store that as an array, and there'll be the index, release keys, 512 again, and then held keys. Okay, I did this multiple times. Oops. So then held keys, which is also the 512 Boolean, and this just shows if any of the keys are in that state. So same thing with buttons. So pressed buttons, and again we don't have nearly as many, so these can just be just store 8. So released and held, same thing. So now that's kind of all the state we're gonna hold. Now we can get into the once. So it's kind of like a singleton, really. So we'll have an input manager, which defaults to null. And then we'll also have that once, which is std once. And there'll be this init function, which we are going to write right now. It's not public, but just init void. And now we can see this change color. So this they refer to the same thing. So now we have that. Let's fill it in. And all this is going to do is it has to follow this with once. If we look here, see it's comp time function void. So it's this, no input parameters, has to be void return, because all it's going to do is set the instance to input manager. And that's going to be this exact instance right here. And so essentially what this will do is the first time we'll see it, but first time we call it, it's going to call the init function. Then every other time we call it, it'll just return this instance. So exactly like a singleton, but it's thread safe and it's just handled directly by the standard library, which is very nice. So now we can start to fill this in. X 0.0, and this can be a little boring. So I'm just going to speed it up. Nice. And now that's all written out, so we can continue. So now we're going to write that function that actually kind of does that instantiation slash get. So do get instance. It'll be a pointer to our input manager. And then we can do one stock call, which again, that calls that initialization function if it's never been called. Otherwise, we would just return a pointer to that instance. So now we're going to go and just fill in all the different input manager functions. So first will be clear, which is called at the end of every frame after, because we don't want mouse clicks to persist past a frame. So we want to clear it every time. And this is how we'll get that instance. So now we have kind of self. Then we do memset self dot press keys and just set them all to false. And we'll do the same with released, but one that we don't want to kind of change across or reset every frame is held, because those can persist. So we'll do press buttons and release buttons. So now we'll do the scroll. Scroll equals dot x, and we again, position doesn't really make sense to clear every frame since it's always in a position. So only clearing ones that make sense. And delta. There we go. So now this is the next one's the most important one, which is going to be update, which is where we take a Zephyr event, so the event from last time, and actually to like store it onto our event manager. Event dot and void. So again, we'll get our self equals get instance, and now we'll just switch on the event depending on what it is. So event, z event, mouse move, and move event. So you kind of have this one, and now I'll actually just write a few of them. So we have mouse scroll, which is a scroll event. We have key press, key repeated, key released, mouse pressed, mouse released. And now let's just keep writing that. So what did I say? Mouse scroll, and then key pressed, key repeated, key released, mouse pressed, mouse released. And then just handle the case of else as you need to do. So now we can fill it in. So mouse move, we have self.mouse delta equals move event dot x minus self mouse pause dot x. And then something similar, but for y. X slash y. And this should be dot y as well, and that one dot x. There we go. And then obviously we want to set the mouse position. X equals move event dot x dot mouse position dot y equals move event dot y. So mouse scroll is going to be pretty easy. We just do mouse scroll dot x plus equals scroll event dot x, and then that same x and y. So now key press, a little bit more exciting. Const key is at int from enum, since we're going to use it as an index. We're going to get an int from it. Self pressed keys, key equals true, and held keys. And this should say key event. There we go. This one's also a key event. So is that? It's a mouse event. So is that? Nice. So now key repeated, be pretty similar, or I guess essentially the same. Those are just going to be the same events coming in. Pressed and held, and then key released. Again, pretty similar, but this time it's going to be released. Oops. keys. And then here's where we unset it being held because it was released. So that makes sense. And then we will kind of just have something similar with mouse press. But have mouse event. And then this will be the button, button, button. All of these just switch to button. And then same here, but it's released. So then held is false. So next is just gonna be all the functions that I guess game developers actually use. So let's start to write them. So get mouse pause can be a position, and then const self, we will see this a lot. Get instance and return self dot mouse pause. And now we're gonna write is key pressed. Now we'll get that key from event dot key. And all these are booleans. Const self get instance, and then the key is int enum as we saw earlier. Key and then return self dot pressed, not buttons but keys of that one. Then we'll do something very similar. Instead of pressed, we'll do released. Then we'll do released keys. And then once again, instead of released, do is key held keys. Then we'll do the same thing, but for buttons. Let's see if I can do this. So key button, I think that's it, except these are mouse buttons, of course. So pretty close. And then instead of key, do keys, and this will be buttons. That looks right. And I think this makes more sense, being B. K/B. Oh, come on, there we go. And now we'll do the mouse ones. So pub function is rolling Y. Const self get instance. Return self dot mouse scroll dot Y is not equal 0. And then we'll do the same thing for X. Again, all these, you can also just write these as you need them, but I have seen use for all these, so I'm just writing them. Get mouse move delta position and const self equals get instance turn self dot mouse delta, and same with scroll. And then that should be it. Mouse scroll. There we go. So now that's all the input manager, all the input functions we're going to write. And now let's move over to root real quick and get that imported. At input, or actually, I like just doing it like that. Core input manager. There we go. I also just like having order to imports. So now is where I'm going to show kind of how to use it. So first I'm going to just write some stuff up here before show kind of what I want to get at. Seed f32 0.02 and const, or I guess it should be var actually. Offset x f32. So this is going to be like actually using the input because that's what I want to show everyone. And because I don't want to just leave you writing input manager code that you can't use. So now when we get into here, after we do this handle input, what we're going to do is if input dot is key held, do A, for example, and we say offset X minus equals the speed, and then I guess multiple. Then input is key. So same thing. And you can write a few of these, just do it as you want. Plus equals speed. So now we can do W, and this time it'll be Y. This will also be Y minus and S. So that's going to be using it. And then of course at the end, we actually need to do input clear, because at the end of every frame we want to clear it. And one thing I did forget to do is actually show how to like add the input. So what we're going to do is go into application, and the function we wrote last time, just right at the start, do input dot update the event, and let's just import input again. Input manager. So now we just feed the event when we hit the event callback into the input manager, and it handles it with our switch, which we just wrote. And something I also realized, we did it over there. Why not do it here? Just reduce the code. Definitely cleaner doing it this way, more idiomatic to Zig. There we go. That's nice. Cool. So again, I promised you all that we're going to use this. So let's do that. So we're going to have to go into our vertex shader, and I'm going to show uniforms. So this is essentially how we feed input from our application into the shader here. And again, I'm not going to get into too specific, but just those two X and Y's that we set based off the input, we're going to move it here. So depending on what that offset is, we can just say u offset dot X plus u offset dot Y. So we're just adding to the X and Y. So that's how we're going to make our WASD move X and Y, really. So let's move back to root, and we'll just have to do a couple things to make it work. So the first thing is we need that uniform location. So we'll do something called gl get uniform location, and we'll take our shader and just that name u offset. So if we go back to that vertex shader, we see it's named u offset. It has to match here with the string. So now that we have that, just after we bind the shader, do gl uniform to f, because again, we go back there, we did a vec2, which is 2 floats. So we'll do that, and then pass that location and then those 2 floats. So x and y. And now, you know, there's always a good chance that I type something wrong, but if we try and run it, and now we have the same things, but now if I do A, I guess that's W, this is S, A, and D, we have it moving around. So this is very exciting. Again, you're essentially on your way to a game at this point. You can draw things to the screen and you can move them around. What else do you really need? We still have our mouse movement, of course, button presses. Escape, yep. And you can adjust the speed variable if you wanted to move faster, slower. It'll be very different depending on your FPS. So if you turn off VSync, you would need such a low speed because it's just going to whip around. And that's where something called time delta comes in. We're not going to do it this episode. We're going to do it very soon. And that will basically just normalize. You can do it like speed times time delta. And it'll just normalize the speed regardless of your frame rate, which you'll want in every game. You don't want people to be moving at different speeds depending on how good their PC is, right? So that's coming up. Again, I just wanted to give an example of how to use the input system because I think this is a very clean API. See, it's is key held A. I think that's very clear, to the point. And that's just what I wanted to show. That's all we're doing today. So I hope you enjoyed. Again, input system, it's pretty cool. Now being able to interact with our keyboard, move the quadrant on the screen, I think that's a lot of fun. I know we hadn't made any changes to anything that shows up on the screen for a few episodes. So it's nice having something that's quite tangible, really. We got our hands literally on the mouse and keyboard, moving it around with our keyboard buttons, and play around with this. You can do all sorts of things. You can make, maybe I challenge you to make the quad change color depending on where the mouse is on the screen. I think that's a fun one. Most of the things should be there set up already. Or uniform 2, or I guess vector 2, you probably want to be maybe a vector 3, and then you can change the colors. That's just a challenge for you. I think it'll be a lot of fun, and it just, again, shows another way to get things working. And realistically, like, we have a lot of the building blocks here where you can make a very obviously basic kind of game. I guess there's not a whole lot to go off of, but you can render things to the screen and you can move them around. That's a big part of games. So yeah, we're at a very good point. And next few episodes, like I said, delta time will be one. Finally moving out of just this one run function. Well, that will be pretty soon, because we'll need to start creating games, scenes, actual applications, because right now everything is just contained in the runtime. We don't want our runtime to be an executable, obviously. We want it to be a library for the game to pull in and use. So that's what's coming up soon. Hope you're enjoying the series. It'd mean a lot if you liked, commented, subscribed. All those things really help. And again, the Discord link's down in the description. I really enjoyed chatting with you all there. That's all I got. So have a great day.